Hello, this is the What If You Never Existed channel. Today I'll tell you a story that will make you think twice before going on an expedition with friends. A story about how the Amazon jungle swallowed a group of American tourists and only one of them returned to tell the truth. But was it really the truth?
My name is Alex Morrison, and I'm the sole survivor of an expedition into the jungles of Peru in the summer of 2019. What I'm about to tell you sounds insane, and I know many won't believe it. But I have to tell this story because they're still there in those cursed jungles, and someone needs to warn others. It all started as a tourist trip to South America. 5 college friends and I decided to celebrate graduation with an adventure tour through Peru. Sarah stumbled upon mention of an abandoned research station from the 1970s deep in the Amazon jungle online. The place was called ElevenLabs and had been abandoned after a series of strange incidents involving scientists. Sarah, the only girl in our group, studied anthropology and told us creepy legends from local tribes. They said that deep in the jungle grew a special type of vine that shamans called ayahuasca moco, the blood vine. The Quechua Indians avoided these lands, considering them cursed. But we were young Americans attracted to everything exotic and mystical. Our group consisted of Michael, a tall athlete with leadership tendencies; Sarah, a smart redhead with a passion for the paranormal; twins Josh and Jake, jokers who never took anything seriously; Fat Ron, our tech genius; and me, an ordinary guy who just wanted to spend the summer with friends. The first day in the jungle passed without incident. We flew on a small plane from Lima to Iquitos, and from there a local guide took us by boat along the Amazon River to the start of the hiking route. The jungle here was incredibly dense. Giant cecropia and rubber trees created a green cathedral 40 meters high. The air was humid and stuffy, saturated with the smell of decomposing vegetation and something else, sweet and disturbing. By evening, we reached a small clearing by a tributary and set up camp. Ron immediately started complaining about the lack of signal. His satellite phone showed only interference. This should have been the first warning, but we decided it was normal for such jungle depths. At night, I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't quite singing and not quite whispering, something in between. The melody seemed familiar, but I couldn't figure out where I knew it from. The sound came from deep in the forest, and it seemed to me that it was getting closer. I woke Michael, but when we listened, everything went quiet. He said it was just wind in the leaves, and we fell asleep again. On the morning of the second day, we discovered the first oddity. Josh woke up with scratches on his hands. Long, thin cuts as if from claws. He swore he went to sleep unharmed, but we decided he just caught on something in his sleep. The scratches looked fresh and were bleeding slightly. As we moved deeper into the jungle, the vegetation became increasingly dense and strange. Ordinary ferns and bromeliads gave way to plants I had never seen. Vines as thick as my leg hung from trees, their leaves almost black with red veins. That's when Sarah pointed to a special vine she recognized from shaman descriptions, ayahuasca moco. The plant looked ominous, dark green stems with a reddish tint to the leaves and a strange metallic sheen, as if they were covered with a thin film of blood. Sarah warned us not to touch it, telling a legend about how the Indians believed this vine fed on human souls and could capture the consciousness of those who dared to touch it. By midday of the third day, we came across the remains of ElevenLabs. It was a creepy sight. Several concrete foundations and rusty remains of scientific equipment, completely swallowed by the jungle. But the strangest thing was how the plants grew here. They didn't just cover the structures, they seemed to deliberately entwine them, creating complex spiral patterns. Ayahuasca moco was everywhere, its red leaves creating an ominous carpet across the entire station territory. In the center of the complex stood the remains of the main building, probably a laboratory or administrative center. The metal doors were tightly wrapped with vines, but Michael and the twins managed to clear a passage. Inside, a nightmare awaited us. The walls were covered with strange symbols, scratched or drawn with something dark. The symbols resembled intertwining vines, but there was something sinister about them, almost alive. On the floor, we found several research journals, surprisingly well preserved in the humid climate. The last entries were dated September 1974. A botanist named Dr. Carlos Mendoza wrote about unusual properties of local flora. Scientists studied plants that demonstrated signs of collective behavior and possible primitive intelligence. With each day of research, the scientists sank deeper into a trance. They began finding scratches and cuts on their bodies that appeared during sleep. Some began speaking in Quechua, though none of them knew it. The last entry was almost unreadable, written with a trembling hand. Las lianas están vivas. Nos llaman. Debemos alimentar la sangre verde. The vines are alive. They're calling us. We must feed the green blood. Ron wanted to leave this place immediately, but Michael insisted on staying the night here. He was fascinated by the mystery of the disappeared researchers and wanted to study the place more thoroughly. Against common sense, we agreed to stay one more night. As the sun set, the atmosphere in the camp became increasingly ominous. The jungle seemed to come alive. Sounds became louder and stranger. We heard branches cracking, rustling, and sometimes that same melodic whisper that had awakened me the previous night. The plants around us seemed to move, though there was no wind. At night, everything went to hell. I woke up to Sarah's scream. She stood next to her tent, pointing at her hands. Her palms were covered with thin red lines, not scratches, but as if drawn with something. The lines formed the same pattern we had seen on the walls of the abandoned building. When we illuminated the surroundings with flashlights, we saw a nightmare. Ayahuasca moco was moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving. The vines reached toward our tents like living tentacles. And from the depths of the jungle came that same singing, now distinctly in Quechua. Josh was the first to panic. He started screaming something about plants trying to grab him and ran into the jungle. We rushed after him, but in the darkness and dense vegetation, quickly lost sight of him. His screams became quieter until they completely died down. When we returned to camp, Jake was gone. His tent was torn, and his sleeping bag was covered with the same red substance we had seen on Sarah's hands. Next to the tent grew a particularly dense thicket of ayahuasca moco, and it seemed to me that I could see the outline of a human body in its interweaving. The remaining four of us gathered in the center of the camp, backs to each other, illuminating the surrounding darkness with flashlights. The plants were definitely moving now. We all saw it. The vines slowly tightened the ring around us, and the singing became louder. Sarah began translating the words of the song. Her knowledge of Quechua finally came in handy, but what she translated horrified us. The voices sang about feeding, about how human blood and flesh gave strength to plants. about how the consciousness of absorbed people became part of the collective mind of the jungle. That's when we understood the truth. The researchers hadn't disappeared. They had become part of this place. Their consciousness had been absorbed by the plants, and their bodies dissolved in the red substance that fed ayahuasca moco. And now the same thing was happening to us. Ron disappeared next. I just turned around, and he was gone. In the place where he stood, a new vine sprouted from the ground, covered with red leaves. In the interweaving of branches, I could swear I saw his face, distorted with horror, but definitely his. Michael tried to break through the ring of plants, swinging an axe, but the vines were too thick and numerous. They wrapped around his legs, then his arms, and dragged him into the depths of the jungle. His screams echoed off the trees, gradually turning into the same melodic singing we had heard all night. Only Sarah and I remained. She held one of the research journals in her hands and mumbled something in Quechua. Her eyes became glassy, and red patterns appeared on her skin. She explained to me that she had found a way to become part of the jungle voluntarily, avoiding the pain of absorption. "They're not evil, Alec," she said in a voice that was no longer entirely hers. "They're just hungry. This is an ancient life form that has existed here for thousands of years. We can become part of something greater than ourselves." I watched as Sarah slowly dissolved into the red haze rising from the plants. Her body became transparent, and her consciousness seemed to flow into the surrounding vegetation. At the last moment, she smiled at me and whispered, "Run while you can, but know we will always be part of this place." I ran. I don't know how, but I managed to break through the ring of vines and go deeper into the jungle. I ran all night, stumbling over roots, scratching on branches, but not stopping. The singing followed me, becoming louder, then quieter, but never completely dying down. By dawn, I made it to the river. A boat of local fishermen picked me up, and I reached Iquitos. Peruvian authorities organized a search operation, but not a trace of my friends was found. The official version, an accident in the jungle, possibly an attack by a jaguar or caiman. But I know the truth. My friends are still there, in those cursed Amazon jungles. Sometimes when I pass by botanical gardens or greenhouses, it seems to me that I hear their voices in the rustling of tropical plants. They sing the same ancient song in Quechua, calling me to return and join them. 4 years have passed, but the nightmares don't stop. Every night I dream of the jungles of Peru, red vines in the faces of my friends peering through the foliage. And recently I noticed that thin red lines began appearing on my hands, the same patterns that Sarah had. Maybe distance doesn't matter. Maybe once you fall under the influence of ayahuasca moco, you remain forever connected to it. I feel something pulling me back to that place, and with each day this desire becomes stronger. But the strangest thing started 3 months ago. I began finding historical documents about those places, old conquistador reports, missionary records that seemed not to exist before. It turns out disappearances happened there not only in 1974. Every 20 to 30 years, groups of people disappeared without a trace in this jungle area, starting from the 16th century. Quechua and Achuar tribes left petroglyphs on rocks, warning about hungry roots and blood vines. The first conquistadors wrote about a devil's garden where plants moved without wind. Even in the 20th century, rubber tapper expeditions disappeared in these jungles. Yesterday, I received a letter from a man who called himself Doctor. Vasquez from the University of San Marcos in Lima. He wrote that he studies anomalous botanical activity in the Amazon jungles and would like to meet with me. In the envelope was a photograph, that same red vine, but grown in a laboratory. On the back was a note. Ayahuasca moco samples show signs of collective consciousness. Need your help. I don't know if I should meet with him. Part of me wants to know the truth, but another part fears that any attempts to study ayahuasca moco will only strengthen the connection between us. And this morning I discovered that the red patterns on my hands began pulsating in time with my heartbeat.
This story was told by Alex Morrison in 2023, a year before his disappearance. Alex disappeared exactly 4 years after the events in the jungles of Peru. His body was found in the same area of the Amazon, among thickets of red vines. After this, Peruvian authorities closed access to that section of jungle. So remember, if you ever find yourself in the jungle and see vines with red leaves, don't touch them. The Amazon jungle remembers everyone who enters its domain. This was What If You Never Existed. See you in the next episode.